For decades now, climate change has been kept on the back burner. Studies, forecasts, even catastrophes in real time have not been able to garner enough attention on the issue. I don't mean to sound alarmist, but climate change is described as the biggest threat to our planet. And yet, geopolitics always seems to take precedence over climate action. This time around, it's a spat between the United States and China. I will tell you more about that shortly. This is WION's Climate Tracker. You're watching with me, Molly Gambhir. It's been a month since the U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, but temperatures are still running high in China. I'm not talking about the heat wave. Beijing is still angry as a result of that visit, and this shows in the disagreement, and it shows its disagreement in every way possible. Sanctions, military drills, even abandoning decades-old ties. But today I want to focus on one such bridge that was burnt down. The Xi Jinping government instantly suspended climate talks with Washington. This was a huge blow for climate scientists and activists around the world. They hoped that the talks will resume within weeks, but that does not seem to be happening. Over the last 30 days, U.S. climate envoy John Kerry has repeatedly urged Beijing to not let climate talks suffer. And today, China has reacted. It has announced one condition to revive the ties. The U.S. side should dispel the negative influence of Nancy Pelosi's scuttling to Taiwan, and this is an indispensable condition of the China-U.S. climate change cooperation. While international experts decoded what this means, climate experts say it will be disastrous to delay the talks, and once again, geopolitics has taken precedence over climate change, over climate action. One of the reasons that the stalemate is worrying is because the US and China are the world's largest greenhouse gas emitters. Both the countries together produce over 40% of global emissions, so a continuous collaboration is crucial for advancing global action. Both have agreed to take action within their borders. The US has passed a massive spending bill to invest in clean energy technologies, and China promised to become carbon neutral before 2060. But in some spheres of the climate-related discussions, a joint action is required, like to cut down on methane emissions. Not just one-on-one discussions that are going to take a hit. One could expect politically divisive global discussions which demand cooperation of both the US and China, like the G20 summit that has started today in Bali and the COP27 scheduled this November. Since Joe Biden took office, the talks ramped up after being on the back burner for 4 years. In April, the climate envoy John Kerry became the first senior member of Biden's administration to visit China, where he met with the high-level representatives on climate change. And then September saw a second trip. At the Glasgow summit, the two countries signed a joint declaration to enhance climate action, including setting standards for emissions reduction, deploying carbon capture techniques, and controlling methane emissions. Experts say with the history of turbulent ties, climate discussions have become somewhat immune. But never before have they come to a complete halt like today. And with me on the broadcast this minute is Megan Darby, the editor of Climate Home News, joining us from London. Thanks very much, Megan, for being here. Will this geopolitical flare-up threaten global action against climate change, according to you, and to what extent will this once again hamper climate action?
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, I mean, both the US and China have their own reasons for acting on climate change. In both countries, they've recently experienced, in parts of the country, extreme heat waves and drought, which are, making climate change impossible to ignore. And there's also a big economic opportunity from clean technology and from transitioning away from polluting sources of energy to a cleaner economy. So they both have domestic reasons for acting, but there's an opportunity to move faster and to accelerate action and to have a positive influence on other countries in their respective orbits by collaborating. And as you say, collaboration has really reached a low point, and the latest diplomatic setback it does limit the opportunities for accelerating international climate action.
Right, and with the impact of climate change so increasingly clear, should climate change be an issue off limit when it comes to the repercussions of geopolitics and conflicts?
Yeah, so I mean, if you go back to the time when Barack Obama was president of the US, then climate change, at that time, like today, there were quite a lot of tensions between the US and China over issues like human rights and trade, the South China Sea. And climate change was seen as an oasis in the desert, an area of cooperation despite these broader tensions. And that meant that, academics and policymakers at all levels of the hierarchy could engage with each other and share expertise and share information, and there could be some progress and some collaboration. All that sort of disappeared, and relations deteriorated under Donald Trump. And it's not really got back to how it was, despite Joe Biden's increased willingness to engage with China on climate issues. China is no longer willing to see this as an isolated issue. And in a way, it's not realistic to see climate change in isolation, because climate change and the responses to it touch every area of society and every area of the economy. So the idea that climate change can be treated separately to broader geopolitical issues, it no longer holds.
Megan, we're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Let's now get you up to speed with the latest from the Group of 20 summit. Leaders have gathered in Bali and the focus is on the environment and climate. Ministers worldwide agreed that even with an ongoing war and economy slumping, climate change cannot be pushed to the back seat. Have a look at some of the comments made during the session.
Environmental multilateralism is the only mechanism where all countries, regardless of their size and wealth, stand on equal footing and equal treatment. The voices of all countries, North and South, developed and developing, must be heard.
We have the responsibility to deliver a clear message to the international community on the urgency to accelerate the implementation of the commitments for a healthy planet for the prosperity of all, including a sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. We must work urgently to tackle the interconnected planetary crisis and avoid accelerating pollution and unsustainable behaviors.
Alongside this ongoing crisis are the growing threats of climate change, biodiversity loss, and land and ocean pollution. These environmental stresses impose additional burdens on the poorest and most vulnerable who have done little to create global environmental problems and whose development aspirations remain unfulfilled.
Pakistan continues to battle flash floods caused by incessant rainfall this monsoon season. The waters have caused massive destruction, reportedly leaving 1/3 of Pakistan underwater. The satellite images showing the extent of the damage caused by torrential rains and floods. The calamity has left more than 1,100 people dead, including 380 children. The historic deluge has impacted 33 million people, which accounts for 15% of the total population of 220 million people. Pakistan has received nearly 190% more rainfall than the 30-year average in the quarter through August this year.
वरी सिम एडो भगी गुडिया से ट्रपल ही न कटी सघिया कुझु बि कोन वरी जेको बि सामान माण्हू कढी आए थो हल्का तल्का पटिया कपिया आश ने बचिया ये खटू कढी ॿाहिरि वेठा पट ते रोड ते पाणी बारिश जो आयो असांजे घर दर असांजा बुॾी विया आहिनि सिम खड्डो आयो आहे उहो जुदा असां हिते घर था ठारायूं हिते न रोड जी वट सां असां ग़रीब ऐं मिसकीन ऐं असांखे ख़ुदा वास्ते मदद कयो ग़रीब ऐं असांखे राशन बि ॾियो असां हिते रहूं था जेतर असांखे का जॻहियूं ठाराए ॾियो जेतर को पाणी हटी वञे नंढड़ा असांजा बचा आहिनि असां सिर बचाइण लाइ रोड ते वेठा आहियूं त असांजा सिर बचनि ग़रीब मिसकीन ऐं बारिश ॾाढो नुक़सानु असांखे कयो आहे.
High levels of the flood waters could be seen through Pakistan's Bahrain Bazaar, a popular destination in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. Relief and rescue operations are underway in all the affected areas as the army helicopters continue to plug stranded families and drop food packages in the inaccessible areas. And amid the mass destruction, Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif called for the multiplication of the foreign aid to deal with the crisis. Calling the current floods the worst in history, the leader emphasized on the food shortage threat in the country that is already marred with record high inflation.
And I can say without any fear of contradiction that this flood situation is probably the worst in the history of Pakistan. The damage to our infrastructure is very vast and is spread all over Pakistan. At my command, that every penny will be spent in a very transparent fashion. Every penny will reach the needy. There will be no waste at all.
Keeping the political differences aside, former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan on Monday night held a 3-hour-long telethon to collect donations for the flood victims. The Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf chief managed to collect $22.5 million through his bid.
अभी तक जितना भी मैंने अंदाज़ा लगाया है और जो मुझे इन्फॉर्मेशन मिली है ये उससे भी बड़ा सान्या है. तो आज हमारी कोशिश है कि अपने पाकिस्तान के अंदर भी हमारे सारे लोग इसमें शिरकत करें और ख़ास तौर पे बैरून मुल्क पाकिस्तानी उधर से बहुत मुझे कॉल्स आई हैं, वो सब इसमें शिरकत करना चाहते हैं, डोनेट करना चाहते हैं.
Meanwhile, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has decided to travel to Pakistan next week. Guterres is expected to arrive in Islamabad on the 9th of September and will return to New York on the 11th of September. The United Nations and the Pakistan government have launched an emergency appeal for $160 million to help those who have been hit the hardest by the floods devastating the country. The funds will be used to provide people with food, clean water, sanitation, emergency education, protection, and health support.
The United Nations is today launching a $160 million plan to respond to the devastating floods in Pakistan, the worst in decades. Since June, heavy rains have pounded the country, and an estimated 33 million people are affected, according to the government. Over 1,000 people have died, among them hundreds of children. Nearly 1 million homes have been damaged, and over 700,000 livestock have been lost.
Our Pakistan Bureau Chief Anas Malik has been tracking those developments on the ground. Take a look at this report.
With 36 more deaths, the death toll in floods in Pakistan have now crossed 1,300 plus, and this is what the official stats say. More than 6,000 kilometers of road has been damaged, and the death toll is hinted, or rather feared, to be increased in the coming days. Now, while the water is receding now from parts of KP, it's going downwards towards parts of Punjab and onwards to Sindh, and because in the absence of a gradient in the province of Sindh, that's where the flooding situation is currently at its worst, where more than 33 million people across the country, that is collectively more than the population of Sri Lanka and Australia, are now damaged or impacted directly because of these floods. The government has been putting out pleas and pledges and appeals for donations for aid supplies, and we recently saw that a UN appeal for collection of about $160 million was also held under the UN banner. We're seeing that the UN Secretary General is due to arrive sometime next week in Pakistan, where he will be undertaking a visit to the calamity hit areas. Anas Malik in Islamabad, Pakistan for WION World is One.
On to India now, where heavy rainfall has inundated parts of the southern state of Karnataka. And in the city of Bengaluru, heavy downpour resulted in waterlogging in the low-lying areas. According to officials, areas like Belandur and Whitefield have seen massive flooding. Fire and emergency personnel were deployed to rescue the people from the flood zones. The inundation has also impacted the movement of traffic heavily in these parts. Heavy rainfall triggered a massive flood in the Kanwar River. The flood fury has turned roads into rivers. Several highways, cars and houses have been submerged as a result of the flood waters. People have been left stranded in the area without food or transport.
We have lost everything. We had gone out of station to work, earn and invest here. This is our condition now. We do not have food to eat.
Since my birth, I have never witnessed this kind of rainfall. It had never happened. We have lost crops like ragi, wheat, mulberry and cocoons. Water has also flooded our homes.
Recent torrential rain coupled with years of water system issues have resulted in a major water crisis in Mississippi's capital city. Authorities in the capital have now declared a health emergency after historic flooding damaged the treatment systems, leaving 180,000 people in the state capital without safe drinking water. Jackson's mayor has now said that the city is working on more water distribution events, further announcing that the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency will provide nearly 30 water trucks. Residents living in the capital city were already put under a boil water notice for a month after the floods worsened the long-standing problems in one of the two water treatment plants, which provides most of the city's water supplies.
What happened is that due to the flood, they were receiving a different composition of water, right? A different makeup of water that made it more difficult to treat. And so if they didn't change the chemical composition of how they were treating it, then we would have left our residents in greater danger and a greater threat. And so that's why they were unable to push out more water, because they were making certain that they were effectively treating the water.
Like many cities, Jackson faces water system issues that it cannot afford to fix. Its tax base has eroded in the past few decades as the population decreased, the result of mostly white flight to suburbs that started after public schools integrated in the year 1970. The city's population is now more than 80% black, with about 25% of its residents living in poverty, and the families living in Jackson are now bearing the brunt. Low water pressure has left some people unable to take showers or even flush their toilets. Meanwhile, those who do have the water flowing from the taps have been asked to boil it to kill the bacteria that could make them sick.
Well, there was a double whammy, but I look at Katrina, what they had to go through. I mean, our situation as it is nothing like what they experienced. I mean, this is misdemeanor. I mean, think of, my God, how many people died and was discomforted and relocated behind that. So it's when you get through a situation like this, you always got to think about it could be worse.
A centuries-old church and a huge megalithic complex are among the underwater monuments that have resurfaced in Spain. And this has happened after a severe drought has caused water levels in reservoirs to plunge. Our next report, getting you the complete story. Take a look.
Climate change has left parts of the Iberian Peninsula at their driest in 1200 years, and winter rains are expected to diminish further. According to the Environment Ministry's figures for August, after a prolonged dry spell, Spain's reservoirs, which supply water to cities and farms, are at just under 36% capacity. The receding waters have exposed the ruins of an 11th century church in the usually submerged village of Sant Roma de Sau. The village was flooded in the 1960s when a nearby dam was built. Usually, the church's bell tower is the only visible sign of the village in the northeastern region of Catalonia. Now, crowds of tourists fill the restaurants in the nearby village of Vilanova de Sau.
A friend told me to come and see something that had not been seen in many years, which is that we could see the whole church that was previously underwater, and that's why I'm here. Usually you can see the bell, so the truth is that we thought, let's see if we can get in. And we saw that it was fenced and not possible to enter.
In Spain's western Extremadura region, the receding waters have revealed a prehistoric stone circle on an islet that is normally underwater. Called the Spanish Stonehenge, the circle of dozens of megalithic stones was discovered by archaeologists in 1926. However, the area has been flooded since 1963 when the reservoir was built.
He came from Cordoba with his wife just to see the dolmen of Guadalpera. We heard in the press that it had been left exposed because of the drought, and we saw it as a unique opportunity.
Now the exposed stones are also drawing tourists who reach the islet on boats operated by private firms. Officially known as the Dolmen of Guadalpera, the site is believed to date back to 5000 BC. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition. We are taking a break at this point. Stay tuned to WION World is One. Thanks very much for watching.